What's up, boss? This is Abraham's wallet. We span the gap between the austerity of obedience to God and the prosperity rising from faithfulness. Run your home and your dough like a biblical boss. Hey everybody, got a little treat for you today. I recorded some conversations I had with my good friends, who I'll introduce in a second, while we were on vacation together in Florida a couple of weeks ago. And so I'm going to play you those conversations. I'm going to share some stats with you as introduction to this episode. So before the lockdowns of 2020, around 3% of U.S. students were homeschooled. And that year of the lockdowns, the number of families increased dramatically who either, one, didn't want their children to become numbed into stupidity by the screen-fed teaching methods that public schools adopted overnight, or they just didn't want them simply to be addicted to screens, which again was the chosen method, or two, they were exhausted by the runaround inconsistency of masking and distancing policies. I had plenty of friends who felt like they were on the end of a yo-yo, and it would change. Sometimes there would be different policies that changed in the middle of the week. Or they simply feared that being around masked people all day was hurting their children's socialization, something that we know is true. Or three, they saw the increased, there was just a ramping up of forced enculturation into socialism, reverse racism, affirmation of sexual perversion. They just saw these things ramping up in public school systems. So they saw these three things. And that year, the number of homeschooling students increased by 63%. This is what we're being told in retrospect. The U.S. government census says that as we were returning to some kind of normalcy in 21-22, that number only fell by 17%. Only 17% of people who left public schools for any reason in the lockdown year actually went back. So this is a dramatic increase in the number of families who are hitting the eject button from public schools. I just want to make a note before we proceed, and that is that you don't have to homeschool, okay? And you don't even have to. I think I can still say this because I don't actually have any information for this. I'd love to hear it from our listeners, but I don't think that you have to leave public school yet. I don't know where you are. If you have a great public school and God-fearing teachers, or at least a neutral school system that doesn't defy your worldview, I'd actually love to hear that. I don't think I can make a blanket statement that you have to leave public school. What you do have to do, this I'm sure of, what everybody listening has to do, is we do have to monitor what our children are being taught. And I personally, I'm as concerned as what they're being taught in the cracks at school culturally. I'm saying in the cracks in quotes. Culturally, as what the school books say that they're reading. And I am concerned about the school books, but I'm also concerned about the culture of the school. I mean, I care about how a teacher addresses a child who says that they're non-binary. I'm very interested in how a teacher handles that argument because it's enculturating the entire classroom. I care about how the teacher and school decorate the classrooms and hallways. I care about how a white child or a black child could be learning that one skin color is to be preferred over another. So what you must do is Ephesians 6:4. You must train your child in the fear and admonition of God. And that obviously also means that you're to prevent them from being trained in the hatred and scoffing and flaunting of God and his ways. So I mean, I think it's sort of basic 101 kind of stuff. But as the cultural heat gets turned up, and by the way, please know that it will be turned up. Read your Bibles. History is not a flat line. Things get worse as the story goes on. See passages like 2 Timothy 3 and 1 Thessalonians and Peter's letters and Revelation, and we can see that there is a ramping up of evil as time goes by, and it gets real bad at the end. But as the cultural heat gets turned up, you Abrahams, we're going to have to draw very clear lines in our homes and around our children's influences. And I know that could sound controlling or the opposite of progressive. I'm not sure what kind of names get lobbied. Fundamentalist. I don't know what names get thrown at that kind of sentiment, but I'll say it again. As the heat gets turned up, as the timelines go on and the heat gets turned up culturally, all of the Abrahams out there, the godly family leaders, are going to have to draw very clear lines in our homes and around our children's influences. I don't mean to get off topic, but I'm trying to give this as an example. If you're not curating the kind of entertainment influence that comes into your home and into your television and onto the screens that your children see, you are asleep at the wheel. We have to curate these things. We have to discern good from evil. We have to discern, this is God talking over and over, the clean. You have to distinguish between the clean and the unclean. That can come into our home. That cannot come into our home. That image is acceptable around here. That image is not acceptable. So my expectation of you listeners, I know this is a long introduction here, but my expectation of you listeners is that, one, you're either already out of public schools, so you're in private schools, or you're homeschooling, or you're doing some combination. In my house, we have been part of a co-op in the past. We're part of a part-time school right now that meets 2 days a week. Or you're some other non-public form of education. Or two, you're considering these things more seriously than ever. You might have come up in public school like I did, but you're thinking, it ain't like it was, and I'm not sure I can send my kids back there with a clear conscience. My expectation is that you're just considering these things more than you ever have. So for both of those audiences, whether you're already out or you're just thinking, you're just considering, I thought I would present to you my good friends, Mark and Bethany Douglass. So you've heard from Mark before. He's been on our podcast a couple of times. Bethany, you might have come across her organically because she's the author of a blog and a little Instagram feed, and she's kind of an influencer. Her thing is called Cloistered Away. Mark's thing is called, he leads a design business in Texas. It's called Fidelis Studios, and if you need rebranding or marketing or SEO help or any of that stuff, and you're anywhere in Texas, you should call Fidelis Studios. They're centrally located and they travel all around the state. Mark also leads something called the Viceroy Project, where he's really trying to do the same thing that we're trying to do here, and that is help families to be strong in the Lord and know who they are so that they can face the world victoriously. So I'm interested in you hearing some of their experiences and their thoughts, because they've been doing homeschooling a long time. And so they have a lot of experience. They have 4 children, the youngest of whom is 13, and we talked to Mark recently about her bat mitzvah celebration. That's Olive, and their oldest is Liam, who is in college right now. So they have homeschooled kids, and they've homeschooled kids out of homeschool and into college world. And so I thought you would benefit from their take on homeschooling. So let's go poolside. I actually recorded our conversations poolside because we were all just hanging out and thought it was a good time to get some thoughts from them. Here we go. Here's Mark and Bethany Douglass. But let's go back to the advent of the Douglass family homeschool. Tell me about how that decision was made. What were the pain points?
Liam, the oldest, was an infant, only maybe a few weeks old. And I was in a bookstore reading and holding him. He was sleeping in my arms. And somebody randomly came up, talked to me about a book, and she asked, "Are you going to homeschool?" And I thought, what? I just had a baby. I've just made it to this side of birth, and it had never crossed my mind. So I was like, I have no idea. I don't know that I'd planned on it, but I just kind of moved on. And then when I moved to our town currently, there were 3 friends so Liam at this point was 2, and I began talking with friends, and they said they were for sure going to homeschool. And I just thought, what? You've already made this decision? Like, he's 2. So they were talking about homeschooling based on they had been connected to an older homeschooling family, and they just were kind of like, that's what we're going to do. And so I think all of those like little nuggets kind of planted the seed for me to be thinking about it long before I had to make a decision about it. So when Liam was 3, and at this point, when Liam turned 3, I had my 3rd. So our first 3 are 17 months apart each. So I had him in a Mother's Day out 2 days a week with some friends. And during that time, I just began praying and asking the Lord about it. And Mark and I had lots of conversations about the idea, theoretically, but I just began praying about it. Mark and I went and visited the public elementary school, and just to see, because I was like, I don't even know what they do in kindergarten. Right. What is a typical kindergarten classroom? So we talked with one of the kindergarten teachers there just to find out, and she had no idea, I think, to even know what to do with us. She was like, I had all these very specific questions because I had been doing so much reading. You what?
We do what we do.
Yeah.
Just give us your kid and leave.
Yes, that was very much like she seemed kind of annoyed, and to her credit, we were there on her break period, and knowing how much teachers do and how essential that break is. But she seemed kind of like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, this is what we do. We work through these letters. They have this technology available to them. This is kind of the way our schedule goes. But they're not prepared to have to convince the parent why it's valuable for you to send their child there.
They're not used to a sales pitch, and
they're
not
not
used to competition.
That's exactly. So she was more frustrated with us, I think, than anything, just because I think she didn't have answers for us for some of the questions that I had, because I'd been doing reading at this point. So
were you underwhelmed by her?
Yes, I was underwhelmed by the whole experience. And then, so we went and looked at all the private schools in our area. We just went to observe and kind of see, what are we even comparing? So we went and we talked to them about what's the ethos of the school? So there would be maybe one school that inclusivity was their primary objective, and they wanted, high academics, but they wanted to make sure that that everybody was treated equally and the same. And that was their primary goal, was inclusivity of all religions, of all races, of all what would now be sexuality, although that wasn't discussed that day. but I'm sure that they would say that. Yes. And then we went all the way to, the private Christian school, to the Episcopal school, to the Catholic church, to the Catholic school. We just wanted to see and compare. And they were all great experiences. I felt like there were really quick cross-offs for us, like, nope, not interested. This is really cool. Or they have this amazing science lab, or they have these amazing technologies, but we don't see our kids here. So there were really quick cross-offs in that process. But I think in the end, Mark and I, as we continued to pray, it wasn't like we had this big bolt of lightning experience where it was like, this is what you need to do. It was just there wasn't anything that felt like home. One. And two, I don't know. I think that Mark and I had this conversation at one point where he's like, it's very possible that we could spend $1 million on our kids' education, K through 12. And they could be really brilliant and be terrible people. Like, that's possible. That's possible that they could be really brilliant and not know the Lord. And so we just were kind of evaluating, what is our objective? Like, as we think about our kids' education, what is our goal? And is it just that they would have academic prowess, or that they would get into a top elite school? Well, what is it? So we kind of had to fish through a lot of that. And I think primarily, while we wanted our kids to, we wanted them to be bright. We wanted them to be able to think critically. We wanted them to be able to read broadly and have discussions broadly. Our primary objective was that they would be who the Lord had them to be, and that they could grow actually into those people best under our caring.
Let me ask you an obvious question.
Yes.
Do you think that the kind of school that your children are in can either help or hurt whether they end up as fully formed disciples or not?
I do. And I say this, that I really feel like the Lord will meet any parent whatever they choose, and that child. I just think the Lord uses all sorts of things, but understanding that you as the parent are have primary responsibility and mentorship over the whole child is going to be a little bit harder if your children are not at home. So there's different trade-offs, is what I mean to say. So if your child is in a school, then you need to be prepared as a parent to be deeply invested in that school community and in what's happening. If it's a private school, then you can have influence in the pedagogy, you can have influence in maybe some of the activities of the school. As a public school, you'll have less autonomy for that, but you can have influence in the character and the presence of, the culture. And so I think the idea that homeschooling requires everything, and if I just send my kids to school, then I have a break for 8 hours a day, that is the broken mindset. So if your children are somewhere, it just means you're going to have to be there with them. So I realize that not everybody feels equipped for whatever reason to homeschool. And I think that there's grace for that. But I also think that it's harder to understand your role as a parent when you've had, when it's been delegated, when some of those things have been delegated to other adults who may not have the same culture, Like, they may not actually have the same mindset and desire for your children. They may desire. So I spoke recently with a mother who is now homeschooling, but her kids started in public school, sorry. And she said to me that they're having to, untrain some things because, the primary objective is that your kids learn how to turn stuff in. It's like that they learn how to do the work that's assigned to them. It's not actually character training. And so they're having to undo a lot of character training that has happened because formation is happening regardless. Like, there is formation happening regardless.
Education is discipleship.
It is, yes, absolutely. So when you have, Charlotte Mason, who's, one of the leading, I would say the leading voices and leading pedagogies in homeschooling, when she says that an education is an atmosphere, a discipline, and a life, that is difficult to achieve outside of your home, especially in the little years. Like, now that our kids are into their teen years, there's a whole lot more activity that's happening outside. But I feel like all of the years in the little years were just building bridge. They were tying heartstrings. So every read aloud, every pause, every math lesson, every play outside, every time that you have this agenda and it gets chucked because everybody's having a bad day and you have to just address hearts and you have to tend hearts. All of that actually creates a bridge that you can stand on in the teen years. So it's creating these relational ties, because in the teen years you need those relational ties to bear weight, especially with the modern culture.
Yeah, I would just say my wife is so kind and so gentle and accommodating, and she wouldn't ever want to say anything that would ruffle feathers. That's one of the things I love about her. Yeah, I did 10 years in public ed. And as a teacher, educator, yes. And I kept telling Bethany, you could do homeschooling at half your capability, and they would still come out ahead. That's what I think, because it's not just as people, education-wise, across the board. I was always shocked at how much wasted time was happening. I was shocked at how low the bar increasingly became. It happened incrementally. And I saw them always teaching to a test, some sort of test, that then when it's over, because we know that the point of education is to get a mark on a test, the last 6 weeks of the school year were just totally wasted. I mean, movies, fill in the blank. So I just saw that bar just getting lower, and I kept thinking, you've got to depressurize some of this for yourself, for your own thinking, because I knew my wife was going to go at that hard, and I knew that she would give it all that she had, but I also knew she would be constantly self-evaluating and thinking, oh, I could have done this, or it would be this much better, and I wanted to just make sure that I alleviated that internal talk, if that makes sense. The other thing is what is it that they're educating these young people to become? And they are educating them to become middle managers, in best case scenario, middle managers in cubicles, filling out forms and spreadsheets. That's what they're educating them to become, competent doers, not job holders, not people who are pushing all of the edges for thought and for development of other people, etc. They can't do that. And I increasingly became convinced, and am even more so now, is that I'll put our family culture up against any other culture. I'll put it up head to head. I think we win. And if you're going to put your kid in the state school, you have to know, I'm now not starting at zero and having to build in. Now I have a headwind. I have something that I'm actually having to fight against. There will be a deprogramming, not just in terms of what is education or what is my best performance or whatever. It's like, no, all the values set. Now I have to be double engaged. I have to fight and contend to pull and extract lies that start to bed in, and then build the stuff in that I actually want built in. It's like double work.
I was going to say, practically speaking, not to over-idealize it, that it was hard. I mean, it was hard when we first started. So our first official year, Liam's, what I would term his kindergarten year, was the same year that I had our fourth. And it was very busy. So you have 4 kids, 5 and under. There's a lot happening. And so I think my ideas, I remember I created this very detailed lesson plan. I'd done tons of research about all the things that we were going to do. And it was clear just a few weeks in, this is not working. This is not working. Whatever my plans.
What you started to roll out.
And I am an idealist, so I always have to, temper that. But I just could see, I don't know, because it was setting these thresholds to where I felt like I was perpetually bumping against failure.
Come on, INFJ.
Yeah,
idealist.
that's right.
What's up?
That's right. So,
World needs dreamers.
I know. But I think just recognizing and seeing now, more looking back, to be able to see that the circumstances we're given are ordained by the Lord. And so there's, the children that you're given, the needs that you're given within your home, whether there's physical disabilities or learning, or I would say, neurological things that are going on that might affect the way that a child learns. All of those things are given, and sorry, my tongue is getting tied. But I just want to say that the Lord is still king in those situations. And so asking him for wisdom and asking him for discernment for your home is like baseline. Before you go following a curriculum, before you go choosing what to do or not, just pray and ask the Lord to give you wisdom for the children that you have and what you need to be learning that year. And I felt like I was slow to adapt to that just because I didn't really have any in-person mentors. I had peers I was doing this with, but we were really plowing. We were starting communities for other homeschoolers in our area. We were really just kind of doing a lot of research and a lot of discussion among ourselves and just doing a lot of trial and error. And there were things that took me a few years to learn that I wish I would have relaxed sooner into them. So I always want to encourage, I heard Susan Weisbauer speak whenever it was our very first year. And she had talked about how you're going to have a third grader who you're homeschooling, and you're going to hear about what your third grader neighbor is doing down the street in their school, and you're going to automatically think we're not doing enough. And I was like, yes, we did encounter that.
Yeah.
But what happens in those middle school years, it just exponentially grows, because the foundations that you need are different than the foundations that are offered in a school. A school setting is actually meant to provide mass learning. So there's a lot of formatting that has to happen in a school that doesn't have to happen in a home. So, we don't have to do the same exact thing in the same exact order or at the same exact time. So creating a rhythm that would work for us and that would meet the different needs within our homes, there was just a lot of room. And I just am so, so grateful. I'm so grateful to have weathered the journey, even the days where, early on Mark would come home from work and I would just be like, I'm done. Just like, where do I sign my kids up for school? Because it was just such hard days. So having his encouragement in those moments to just be reminding me of the simplicity of what needed to be done in a day rather than all these details that I think we have the tendency to want to focus on the what or the how so much. But really, it's this thread line. You are building a relational foundation, both in the Lord and together as a family, that just is this enormous springboard as they get older.
You didn't say this, but I think you might say, depending on where you are, what the schools are like around you, what your kids are like, what kind of discipleship you're going for, various kinds of educational systems can aid you in doing that thing. I think the danger is not putting any evaluative effort towards your kid's education and just doing the default.
Okay, I'm in charge of feeding them,
right,
them, making sure they're generally good people. They're going to take care of making sure my kid can read, that they learn what they need to learn, and that they turn out okay to get a job in adulthood. It's kind of the mindset of of education.
And what's the danger of compartmentalizing like that?
Is that life is not compartmentalized. So you talk to any adult, and how can you talk about the work they do apart from their marriage, or apart from their family, or apart from what you're learning? All of it is connected. So it's the same as if you're to say, well, that my faith is reduced to what I do on Sunday morning. Your faith is all of you. I mean, it is the foundation of your life, so it affects or ought to affect all of our lives, so that we are thinking about our jobs, we're thinking about our parenting, our marriage, the way we relate to our neighbors, the way that we serve in the community, whatever, that all of that is impacted. It's the same with education. So it actually gives opportunity for there to be a transfer of culture versus a competing culture.
Yeah.
Whereas you will have the culture of the school, whatever that is,
Right.
they have an agenda.
Right.
They have an agenda.
So the false thinking structure is, I'll work on character, I'll work on faith, they work on math over there, and they don't have any input into culture.
Right.
Realizing, no, they're discipling my kids 35 hours a week.
That's right.
And for virtually all families, that's more time than you put toward discipling your kids at all. And it's really naive to consider that they don't have a worldview that they're putting forward, they don't have character values that they're putting forward, and they are doing it, right?
Yeah, and even worse is what I've heard from time to time, particularly among evangelicals, is, hey, I'm just sending my kids out to be salt and light in the school system. And when I hear that, I am always shocked. I have to keep my mouth closed from hitting the floor, because I think, oh, are your kids like St. Paul and Barnabas?
Trained evangelists?
Yeah, they're willing to go out, and they are equipped enough to contend for the faith in the midst of that kind of aggression, hostility, and subtle subversion. That's amazing, because I've met 0 fifth graders who are prepared to do something like that.
Why do you think parents say that kind of nonsense about their children that they're handing over to a system that's anti-God?
I think it's a salve. I think it is a way to sort of soothe, probably, because I think every parent has built-in anxieties about where is it that I'm sending my kid. And I think it's a way that we justify that decision-making, if I had to speculate.
Well, I think you have more information than speculation.
It is, we're parenting, so it is an extension of ourselves. Like, our children really are truly an extension of us and our dreams, vision, perspective, and scope of the world.
And they should be.
Right. And so when there's maybe some sort of question that comes up against how we are doing the process by which we're doing something, education being the one we're talking about now, there can be shame attached to that and fear attached to that. And if you're talking to a parent who's never been told, you don't have to do things the way that this whole program runs, does not have to be education. Education is a bigger picture of the person and more honoring of the person and who the Lord's made them. I think there are some people that can be angry, righteously angry, about that they haven't been told, So I think there's so many layers to that, which is why I do always want to treat it sensitively, because it is the decision of the parent, and also it's part of their faith in the Lord and following. But I do think it's going to cost you something. All of parenting is costly work. And I think any part of us that says, I'm going to delegate this part of parenting to somebody else, then that should be like a touch point of questioning for you to decide, how well does that person know your culture? Are they going to be able to actually impart, and I would say as believers, a kingdom culture, or the culture that we want to transfer as a couple or as a family?
Just returning to my earlier point, what I was going to say, I'm just thinking of young parents listening to this and trying to weigh their options. And I think I think it would be the case, certainly in a small town where you know the teachers that you would be handing your kids off to, and you go like, oh, I'm totally in sync with these believing teachers at the public school. I want my kids under their discipleship. That's fine. We have a dear friend in Cincinnati who he teaches like 6th grade math, and I want my kids around that guy, but he's 50 minutes of their school day. But my point was that when people are considering their options, I don't think your message is keep your kids out of public school. The message is, please, for God's sake, weigh the educational options and realize I am in the disciple-making business when it comes to parenting, and I've got to consider all of the inputs that are going into my children. So now let's go back to after you made those decisions. You're having the frustrating days where you're telling Mark, I want out. And if I can just revisit, I just had one more thought. I remember that when Mark and I ran into the Holy Spirit in our early 20s, we had that frustrating feeling at our religious backgrounds, going like, wait, aren't you Jesus people? Aren't you Bible people? Why didn't you tell us about the Holy Spirit? This enlivening, exciting, real-time aspect of, I'm not just signing up for a set of doctrinal beliefs. I want to sign up for the electricity of life in God now, and the frustration that comes with, I was sold a bill of goods. And I think that parents can feel that way if they talk to somebody like you after their kids are grown and realize, wait, I had options? And that there's a number of ways I could have done this. And I think that people tend to think, I know that this is true where I live, they tend to think either we ship them to the public school, shrug our shoulders, cross our fingers, and hope for the best, or get ready to pony up $30K a year to send them to the fancy private school where the outcomes are not much better, where the kind of kids that are being produced there and the kind of culture that's there is it's sort of like the whole... it's a different set of problems. It's a different set of problems. It's kind of like the divorce rate is the same inside and outside the church. There's issues there. So anyways, back to, I just wanted you to tell us practically, so what did you decide? What did it look like when you looked at your options? Did you do everything in the house? Was there a couple of days a week when you went to a co-op? What did you guys decide, and how did your... I could ask that now. You've still got 3 kids that you're homeschooling. So what's the process that you've landed on practically?
I mean, honestly, I don't think that there's been one process, and that is part of the beauty of it, is that you are learning and growing, but you're doing it with your children. So there's not this, once again, there's not this compartmentalizing of, okay, now I'm in mom mode, and now I'm in homeschool mode, and now I'm in whatever other things that you're involved in. You are one person, and you are interacting. So when you're having a hard day, your kids are going to know you're having a hard day, and that's going to impact the way that you do everything altogether. Or when they're having a hard day, that's going to impact everything. So it's like, but the grace and the gift that doesn't feel like a grace or a gift from the Lord in the little years, it feels hard. But the gift in that is that you have to work through it together. So whether that's taking... You know what? I'm getting really angry or frustrated as a parent. I'm going to go step outside by myself for 15 minutes. Nobody can come talk to me. Whether it's like doing something where I can breathe and talk to the Lord and come down and deal with my own emotion before I start to actually engage my children again. Or whether it's something that they're working through and patiently taking time to work with their thing that they're grappling with. It is the gift is that we are building connection together and with one another, but also with the Lord, which is a life skill for all of life. it is something that we come back to now in their teen years and will continue to come back to, because we never stop being children of God. We never stop being in family with one another. We never stop learning. So, and growing as people, or being sanctified by God. So there's every single thing is, I think it was just so compartmentalized in the little years that I really thought of it as, okay, these are the objectives, the learning objectives that were concrete in our, math, science, reading, whatever we're going to do. And it has changed because our capacities have changed. And that's part of growth in the Lord. So I would say setting a rhythm has always been a gift for me, not a schedule. So not a okay, at 8 o'clock every day we're going to do this, at 9 o'clock every day we're going to do this, but a general system of to how we were going to move through our day. So usually we did start around the same time every day. And from there, it would be first we're going to do this. Everybody's going to wake up and we're going to have breakfast, clean our rooms or make our beds, get dressed, kind of just move into our day together, do our chores together. But the thing is I would say just even on that point is when the kids get older, they're helping run the home with me. It doesn't fall just to my own capacities that I'm the one that's in charge of doing all the things. They are learning ownership for the home too themselves, because it's their dwelling place too. It's not just mine.
It's very funny as we're having this conversation. Yeah. The children are very interested in this conversation.
Because this is the way we live our life.
Yeah, but they probably not hear you talk about it very often. You mentioned the sequence of things. Have you ever used a private school or a co-op or anything like that?
Classical Conversations had not been anywhere in our area. So our first year of homeschooling, we drove to a community an hour away to be a part of one once a week. And Olive was just an infant, my youngest. And so we would pack the pack and play, we'd pack lunches, and we would just go away for a day. And then the next year we decided we joined with 3 other families and started a community locally in our area so that we could begin growing within our community. So we've done that. That's kind of, I would say CC has been kind of a thread line, even though we did take a break from it for a few years. It's been a common thread, definitely through our teen years. And so we've done, in the little years also, I had a college student, because we live in a college town. We had a college student come to the house 2 mornings a week, and she would help with just very practical things, sometimes helping me with grocery shopping, or she would maybe play with the baby while I was doing a lesson of some sort. So there was a lot of just logistical support in that way in the in those really little years where I had a lot of just a lot of logistical management with little kids. But now that kind of transitioned later into the elementary school years, when they were able to do more on their own, not academically, but helping with the house, helping at the grocery store, helping making meals. They were able to learn all of those things, which really lightened the load. And now, we're back to, they all have jobs and are working outside of the home. And so we're navigating a new territory again of how the household runs. But there were a lot of practical supports in that way. Is that helpful?
Yeah. Yeah, I've quoted my sister before when we've talked about large families. Great episode, by the way. And she says that if you've trained your children well, once they get to a certain age, not only are they not taxing you, they're actually helping the house run, to the point that she said, I could add 5 more kids to our system. It wouldn't make anything harder on me, because my adult children run the house. Once they get about 12 years old, if they're trained, they can do everything I can do. So I might step in and answer a algebra challenge or something, but otherwise they can chop an onion as good as I can and start the laundry. Okay, so let me put this up on a tee that either of you can answer, because I'm just thinking of what I've seen, abuses I've seen. So, okay, classical conversations. Oh boy, learning Latin and considering a Bible verse every once in a while. So, can you could stick your kid into a classical conversations machine, and then you get St. Paul on the other side, right? So I get to like,
you can make anything an idol, including a curriculum.
What do you define by what do you
Anything that you are going to trust in instead of the Lord. So you can do that with any aspect of parenting, and there's a lot of information and a lot of experts out there who will give you fodder for that. But I think, what it comes down to is this regular conversation with the Lord about what He's doing with your family in that particular time, and what they need to be learning, what you need to be learning. And I've had different capacities as a parent. Like, I have way different capacity now for some things than I did a decade ago. But the Lord has been a constant thread line to meet me in that place. And I think you asked a while back, like, what was the thing that kind of like helped you come back on the days that felt very hard? And it was always the Lord and encouragement from Mark. And when I would come back to look at the alternatives, that at the end of the day, I truly believed that the Lord would give me what I needed for my kids, for what they needed, for what He has in store for them for life. And that it might not always look like the thing I needed. And it doesn't mean there aren't holes, because for sure there are. But they have the avenues and the relationship with the Lord and the relationship with us to navigate when we stumble into holes, whether it's educational holes or character holes or whatever they are, that we're learning still. And so it just is always encouraging to just get back up and get back to the work again.
All right, Liam, you've been loitering. Have you ever seen anybody in any sort of homeschooling type of situation, and they didn't turn out like totally mature disciples of Jesus? Have you ever seen that one?
Yeah, pretty constantly.
Okay.
Yeah, people go AWOL.
It happens.
It happens. I wouldn't say that it's the majority.
No.
I think that's an irregular thing. It's very sad, and most of the time you'll see the community rally, which is really cool. That's something we've seen in the last couple of years. Is just people that happens.
So I think that we can, just to connect to something we've said earlier, in the world that you guys run in, you're used to bumping up against families that have done something more intentional. They've made intentional choices. But I just know how people are, and people they're over here that somebody's doing this educational thing with their kids, and go, their kids are great, so I'll just put my kids in the same kind of program they're in, and they will also turn out great. Not realizing what Bethany said earlier, which is disciple making is a 24-hour-a-day enterprise, and that no school is going to make a disciple for you. There's not a program that's going to create a culture of honoring the King under your own roof. And now, Liam, you're out of your parents' house. What are you doing these days for education-wise?
I'm going into my sophomore year at New St. Andrews College. It's in Idaho, and it's a classical Christian school. It's modeled off of the first years of Harvard.
When Harvard was a Christian school?
Back in the glory days.
Let me just ask, how are you hanging academically?
I think my 12 years of being homeschooled prepared me well.
How?
Independence. Like, nobody... When I turned 13 or 14, like, mom was busy with the younger ones. So it was up to me to push myself academically. And with supervision and support. But like, I eased into that position. Mm-hmm. And when I went to school, I was prepared to push myself. And I think that's the biggest thing. There's obviously little things like I did Latin through
A's and B's.
A's and B's.
A's and B's. I always tell this story as well. Forgive me of my own past, but one thing Linda and Roger did very well, I don't know how they came up with this, was that by the time I was a senior, I had access to a car. I had a job with my own money. And they told me, this is your school. This is your academic career. Good luck. We're never going to come back and go, did you turn in your English paper? It was due Thursday morning. Their parenting was in many ways done when I was about 16. And they expected me to run my junior and senior year of high school and figure it out. Yeah. And go, if you have room for the class play and you're trying to do basketball and honors classes, figure it out. If you think you can do it, try it. If you don't think you can do it, don't try out. And do you have enough money to go on that school trip? Well, figure it out, because you have a job. And I had to balance my own checkbook, and I didn't have a curfew. If I wanted to stay out to 2 a.m. the night before a test, good luck. All the best. And I know now that totally set me up for my college years, because I was surrounded by kids that were going bonkers because they had their first taste of freedom. And I figured this is no different. The life I lived at Texas A&M was no different than the life that I lived at home.
It's just more expensive.
Well, it wasn't more expensive for me. I was just living with friends. Yeah. So instead of having my buddies spend the night at my house 2 nights a week, we were spending the night 7 nights a week. And there was more temptations to play Nintendo late into the night, but it was the same life. And I had a job at school the same way I did at home, and I was running stuff similarly, and I had to run my own schedule. So what percentage of college students that you run up against at New St. Andrews are from a homeschooling background that's something like yours?
If I had to give a number, I would say somewhere between 30 and 40%. It's the most I've ever interacted with. Now there's a lot of them that actually did classical conversations. That was a surreal moment in the library, and we were singing one of the songs, and I was like very confused on what was happening.
You're like, wait, am I in the in group all of a sudden?
Right, you were getting the same education 3,000 miles away from my house. It was funny. Yeah, it's really cool though. Like, we can all sing our president's song, and like, it's special.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know what you have to say about this, but my question is, do you feel like your homeschooled / classical conversations background set you up academically for the stuff that you're reading and thinking about and discussing and having to speak about at school now?
Absolutely. Yeah. So really what it is, it's either you're homeschooled or you're private schooled. There are some public schoolers.
They'd be in the minority where you are.
Yes. Yes, they would. And you can generally tell the difference between the two. So the private schoolers work really well with deadlines. They know how to navigate turning stuff in.
Managing themselves.
They know how to they know how to read their professors and kind of get an idea of what they're expecting and what they want, which is a new skill that I'm actively learning. So they were very good at catering to what the professor wanted, and a totally different skill that you learn outside of homeschooling. While as a homeschooler is in like recitations, they're able to interact with ideas and conversate over topics and ideas a little bit better than the private schoolers generally. Yeah, you're kind of good at winging stuff. Uh-huh. That's a general.
Yeah.
General.
And let me ask parents. So, I have not had this experience yet. Tell me a little bit about your feelings and thoughts of now hearing that the culture that you worked so hard to curate is now being carried not into the wider world. He's still in a bit of a bubble where he is, but he's far from you. and just to hear him, like, he's celebrating the Sabbath with his housemates. Any thoughts on that?
It's wonderful and very unexpected, honestly. I mean, whatever a school does or doesn't put on a website or in a brochure, you really can't. I feel like you can't entirely trust that. The actual boots on the ground will be the validator of whether whatever it is that they say that they are, whether they actually are, right? But we're a year in, and we've said we couldn't be more pleased, honestly, because they have an understanding of the goal is to produce a disciple who can think critically and then contend, because they will be forced to contend. And that was actually my biggest, the decision, or the one factor that I felt like was the biggest, was, does this equip my guys to go out and throw an elbow and know how to fight? That's honestly what I wanted for them more than anything. Because I'm under no illusions that things are going to get better or that they'll be in a less hostile environment. Certainly not. So I am so thrilled that they found like-minded people who are going through these formative years. I mean, because college is really this sweet, weird, surreal time. And, the public institution where I met you, Stephen, even that institution is really different 20-something years later than what it would have been. So I feel like they're getting something of that where they are. And connecting with the right kind of network of people that will be lifelong friends for them is really valuable. We talk about to young people all the time that you go to a university for three things. There's credentialing, there's the actual education itself, and there's the network, right? That's what it is that you buy when you buy an undergraduate degree. And so I'm pleased with the network. I'm very pleased with the education. But in terms of credentialing, they'll know how to think their way through whatever happens next. And I don't know what else I could want.
How do you rate your arrow here?
A+. Yeah, he's doing great. And it's hard, and we sent him up there, and we gave huggies, and there were tears, and we just were like, well, who knows what this year will be like. And he rose to the occasion, and he fought his way through, and I know it wasn't easy, but I'm really proud of him.
We've talked about, there's kind of been a thread line of disciple making in this conversation. And I think it stands to say that your children are being made disciples of something. And so the question is, of what? Of whom? And so I think that probably early on, I would have thought, in terms of the college experience, I would have wanted to have a broad, like a totally different experience than his homeschool years. And I think what has been great is the physical removal. It's like it's been a controlled transition, in the sense of it's not like thrown in the deep end, sink or swim. It is like he's living on his own, with guys, but he's having to manage a budget. He's having to grocery shop and make his own food. He's having to pay bills, and he does all of that. And so even the fact that, we can talk about the academics, but I think even just in terms of the equipping for life, that that college is not seen as this extension of childhood, where I just, on my parents' budget, I'm going to live large, and I'm going to play, and maybe I'll go to class somewhere in there, and I'll of course study enough to be able to pass my classes, but I'm just going to coast and enjoy and have the best time. And I think being able to see him grow in maturity and be able to see maturity is not antithetical to fun. Those things are not in opposition with one another, that there's a way that we grow into maturity as adults and also learn to grow in joy in the work the Lord's given us to do. And that's been something that's been so joyous to see as a parent, is not that he's not having fun, that he's now just doing academic work and trying to budget and do all these adulting things, but that he's learning to find joy in those things in the Lord. So that's been a treat. And I also feel like I want to make 2 book recommendations.
Yeah.
Can I? So there's two things that I feel like complement the things we've talked about today. One of them that I read when I was sprawled over 3 different stages of learning. So Liam was like maybe in junior high-ish ages. Burke was also in that age. Blythe was in late grammar, and Olive was in younger grammar. And I read this book, The Soul of Discipline by Kim John Payne, where he talks about the stages of development in childhood and talks about, he uses this litmus for the Governor Gardner Guide, and like how in the younger years our children really need our governance. They really need us to make decisions on their behalf, to direct them and help steer them. They need that kind of security. But as you move to at what is at the end, which I think speaks to what your parents did well, Stephen, and what we've tried to do with our kids, is as they come to these later teen years where they're in high school and transitioning to adult, is actually functioning more as a guide for them. So asking questions like, okay, you've said, I've heard you say all of these things that you desire to do. What's your plan to get there? How are you going to set up a study schedule to get that done? You know you want this score on the SAT. What's your plan to do that? And like functioning as a guide to ask questions rather than giving directives to command a certain something. So that was a very, very helpful book, I think, as people are transitioning. Yeah. Second book that I would say is You Are What You Love by James Smith, and where he talks about the power of a spiritual habit. And he's talking about the liturgies that form our lives and how not just they're secular liturgies, and they are, as we are participating in them, these cultural liturgies, they are forming us, whether we're aware of them or not. And he talks about just kind of this you are what you love, that we may be able to think of the things that we want for our children or for ourselves, but really it is what are we doing with our lives? What are the habits of our lives? Because that is actually what we're training our children to do. So it's less about these ideals and these abstractions, that it's actually about what are the habits of our lives that are actually creating a path of formation for our children and for ourselves to grow in the Lord and grow as people.
You guys have both touched on this. But when you consider kind of putting the educational pieces together as you see fit, that is a very entrepreneurial move. And as Liam just said, he feels equipped to do entrepreneurial things. You called it making up as you go. And Mark, would you give us a couple of words on raising particularly these two sons to be equipped to make it up as they go and not be the job holders that you described the public school system, which you taught in for 10 years, developing people, enculturating people to do, but you are making, and the path that they're going on is we're making builders, we're making creators, who can create worlds as they go. Can you speak to that for a second?
It's really fascinating because, Stephen, you and I have talked before about how the counsel of our fathers to us was just to get a degree from the big state school, and you probably won't be actually operating in that degree or in that field, but it's the degree that counts. And so when you find yourself on the other side of that and realizing that, you know, most of the people in our generation, Gen X and below, will have 7 or 8 different iterations of a career. That's fascinating, right? That's not the world of our fathers. And with grade inflation, everybody's now got advanced degrees. And so what does any of that actually mean? Well, it means that we're going to have to figure out, and my sons and daughters will have to figure out things on the fly in a way that we never did. And certainly our parents never did. So we're interested in training people who can identify an opportunity, make a move, figure out how to build systems and structures around that, and then thrive, because we're not going to depend upon the government to do that for us, and we're not going to depend upon big corporations that probably don't also have our best interest at heart. And so we're going to have to figure out how to start businesses, employ people, build teams, create value, generate revenue, and keep moving. And that was the last thing on my mind 20 years ago. I didn't want to do that. I don't even consider myself particularly entrepreneurial. I really don't. I know people who are serious, like dyed in the blue all the way down to their root structures, entrepreneurs. And I don't think of myself in those terms. But I've had to be, and increasingly we will have to be, because we're going to have to be able to figure out ways to, generate a lot of revenue to be able to power forward the generations that are going to come. So that's a big consideration for us. We feel like we were kind of behind the 8 ball on that. I wasn't trained into it. I didn't see a lot of that evidenced. And we're coming up to speed on it, and hopefully they have a leg up and an advantage in a way that I didn't.
That's great. Well, thanks for talking about your homeschooling journey. And as we kind of close it out, again, I'm just thinking of young families who have, Bethany, they're in your old situation. They have a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. They're considering what's before them. And I think we would agree they're not looking at what you were looking at 20 years ago. They're looking at a much more antagonistic culture. I know that you spend a lot of time with young moms that might be listening, and any thoughts that you would advice you would give to a young family that's kind of weighing their options?
There is nothing, you will never know enough, you will never feel competent enough or confident enough or whatever other things, or feel sufficient enough for the things that the Lord has called you to do. And yet, still, it is this one great act of faith that is the most beautiful offering, both to the Lord and to your children. And you're not alone. You're not alone in it. I mean, more than ever, to speak, I know that you just spoke about the antagonism of the culture, but also more than ever, there are more people in the same boat. More people saying, I don't like the trajectory of this plan right here, and I'm going to go rogue. I'm going to go do something different. So find a community to connect into real people. There's tons of information, there's tons of resources online, but finding people to go at it together, to be able to encourage one another deeper in the Lord and in the commitment that you've made to your children. It is the greatest gift, and that's all.
My last thing is I really want to end on a word of optimism, which is that you're going to win. It's going to win in big, powerful ways. And I want the people of faith, God's people in America in particular, to really understand that that the eyes of the Lord roam to and fro throughout the face of the earth, looking for those hearts that are completely yielded to Him, that He may strongly support them, right? Every step that we've ever made, we stepped out in not knowing whether this was going to pay off or it would be worth it or if it would succeed. And the Lord has honored every small act of obedience and submission. He always tends to do that. So I would just encourage you, there's a big, bright horizon ahead, to be ambitious, to take big swings, and to go for it in ways that just seem almost at times crazy or irresponsible, and put more weight and more dependence on the Lord. He'll see it, He'll honor it. He does things with our little 5 loaves and 2 fish all the time. He totally exceeds our expectation. So I want everybody to be encouraged. That's more than anything. That's what I want.
Great. Thank you.